Hello, and welcome back to LoveBombed. This is the podcast where we talk about relationships, emotional patterns, and the things that often make more sense after the relationship has changed. I'm Jen from LoveBombed, and today's episode is called Why We Ignore Red Flags. One of the most difficult parts of heartbreak is looking back and realizing that some of the signs were there much earlier than we wanted to admit. Once the relationship ends or begins to unravel, those moments suddenly seem obvious. We replay conversations in our minds, remember things we brushed aside, and start wondering how we missed what now feels impossible to ignore.
Looking back on some of my own experiences, I've realized that I didn't completely miss the red flags. Most of them were there. The harder part was understanding what those signs actually meant and allowing myself to take them seriously. I think that's true for a lot of people. We don't always struggle to see the warning signs. We often struggle to accept what they're trying to tell us.
The truth is that most people don't completely miss red flags. More often, they notice something that makes them uncomfortable, but immediately begin searching for an explanation that allows them to remain emotionally invested in the relationship. The difficulty is not necessarily recognizing the concern. The difficulty lies in what happens after it has been recognized. A comment raises concern. A reaction appears disappropriate to the circumstances. Subtle inconsistencies begin to emerge between a person's words, actions, and commitments. Although something doesn't feel quite right, many people respond by searching for explanations rather than examining the concern itself. In the process, attention shifts away from the behavior and toward finding reasons why it shouldn't matter. An important question is often overlooked. Regardless of the explanation, what does the behavior consistently reveal about the relationship? At first, this approach can appear thoughtful and compassionate. In many situations, it reflects a genuine effort to understand another person's perspective rather than rushing to judgment. Healthy relationships require understanding, patience, and grace. Problems begin when understanding becomes a substitute for discernment, and every concern is met with an explanation rather than an honest evaluation. Over time, the focus shifts away from the behavior itself and toward finding reasons why the behavior should be overlooked. One of the reasons this happens is that emotional attachment changes the way we process information. When we care about someone, we naturally want the relationship to work. We want our hopes about the future to be true. We want the connection we feel to mean something. As a result, we often give more weight to the information that supports those hopes than to the information that challenges them. Many people assume that missing red flags means they were naive or lacked good judgment. In reality, intelligence has very little to do with it. Sometimes highly intelligent people are actually better at rationalizing behavior because they can find a reasonable explanation for almost anything. A canceled plan can be explained away. A lack of communication can be justified. An inconsistency can be given the benefit of the doubt. Over time, more energy is spent explaining the behavior than evaluating the behavior. Another reason people ignore warning signs is that empathy can sometimes overpower discernment. When someone shares painful experiences, abandonment wounds, family struggles, or stories of being hurt in previous relationships, it is natural to feel compassion. Most caring people want to understand where someone is coming from. The challenge is that understanding a person's behavior is not the same thing as accepting it. A conversation leaves an uneasy impression. As time passes, small inconsistencies begin to accumulate, creating a sense that something is not fully aligning beneath the surface. Those realities can be difficult to accept because many people believe that understanding someone's struggles should automatically make the relationship work. Unfortunately, that is not always how relationships operate. One of the most valuable skills a person can develop is learning the difference between empathy and discernment. Empathy allows you to understand someone's experiences. Discernment allows you to evaluate whether their behavior is healthy for you. Both are important. Problems arise when empathy becomes so dominant that discernment disappears entirely. Red flags are not predictions about the future. They are information. They are signals that deserve attention. Not every concern means a relationship is doomed, but every concern deserves honest observation. Healthy relationships can withstand questions. Healthy people don't become threatened when reasonable concerns are addressed. Over time, healthy relationships tend to become clearer, while unhealthy relationships often become more confusing. Sometimes the hardest lesson is realizing that the red flag was not the moment itself. The red flag was how quickly you abandoned what your instincts were trying to tell you. One of the biggest misconceptions about red flags is the belief that recognizing one should automatically lead to action. People often assume that once a concern has been identified, the next step should be obvious. If something feels wrong, they should leave. If a behavior raises concern, they should immediately address it. If a pattern appears unhealthy, they should have complete clarity about what it means. In reality, human relationships are far more complex than that. Identifying a potential red flag is one skill. Understanding its significance and determining the most appropriate response is another. Recognizing a concern doesn't automatically provide clarity about what action should follow. In fact, this is where many people become confused. They assume that if they cannot immediately explain why something bothers them or determine exactly what they should do about it, then the concern must not be valid. What they often fail to recognize is that uncertainty about how to respond does not invalidate the observation itself. A person can recognize that something feels off without immediately understanding its meaning. A comment might feel dismissive, a promise may be broken, someone's explanation may not quite add up. The concern is noticeable, but there might not be enough information to determine whether it reflects a misunderstanding, a temporary problem, a one time mistake, or the beginning of a larger pattern. Not knowing what to do next doesn't make the concern any less real. Many people assume they should only trust their discomfort once they have a clear explanation or a clear plan. However, awareness often comes before understanding. It is entirely possible to recognize that something deserves attention long before its significance becomes fully clear or before an appropriate response has been identified. As a result, people often find themselves caught between what they are observing and what they hope is true. They don't want to overreact, unfairly judge someone, or walk away from a potentially meaningful relationship because of a misunderstanding. Many individuals believe that if a situation is truly unhealthy, clarity will eventually come in the form of a defining moment that removes all doubt. They look for definitive proof, a convincing explanation that validates their concerns, or a single event that clearly justifies a decision. More often, however, certainty emerges in a different way. Rather than one dramatic incident, the same concern tends to reappear across multiple situations. The circumstances may vary, but the underlying experience remains familiar. Disappointment continues to resurface. Confusion persists despite repeated conversations. Important needs remain unmet, and resolved issues keep returning in slightly different forms. Over time, the concern becomes less about any one event and more about a pattern that is difficult to ignore. As these patterns begin to emerge, many people find themselves unsure of how to respond. They recognize that something is concerning, yet remain uncertain about what action, if any, should follow. They assume that acknowledging a concern means they must immediately make a major decision. They believe they either have to leave the relationship or convince themselves that everything is fine. In reality, there is often a middle ground that people overlook. Noticing a red flag doesn't always require an immediate ending. In many cases, it calls for thoughtful evaluation, open communication, and a willingness to observe what happens next. The responses that follow often reveal far more than the original concern itself. Healthy relationships can withstand honest conversations about concerns. Healthy partners may not respond perfectly, but they are generally willing to listen, reflect, and make adjustments when appropriate. Rather than viewing concerns as a threat to the relationship, they recognize them as opportunities for greater understanding, communication, and growth. When evaluating a concerning behavior, the most important consideration is often not the mistake itself, but the response that follows once the issue has been brought to light. Mistakes, misunderstandings, and lapses in judgment are a normal part of being human. Even healthy relationships will encounter moments where one person falls short of expectations or unintentionally causes harm. What provides meaningful insight is how the individual responds after the concern has been addressed. A healthy response typically includes a willingness to acknowledge the impact of their behavior, take responsibility where appropriate, and engage in genuine efforts to repair any damage that was caused. It also involves a commitment to learning from the experience and making reasonable changes moving forward. Equally important is whether those efforts result in observable improvement over time. While meaningful change rarely happens overnight, there should be evidence that the concern is being taken seriously and that progress is being made. In contrast, when the same behavior continues to occur despite repeated discussions, apologies, or explanations, the issue may be less about the original mistake and more about an ongoing pattern. Repeated explanations, promises, or justifications can sometimes create the illusion of progress without producing any meaningful change. For this reason, it is often more useful to focus on consistent behavior than on intentions alone. The way a person responds to feedback, accepts accountability, and demonstrates change over time frequently provides far more information about the health of the relationship than the original red flag that first captured your attention. Learning to trust yourself doesn't mean assuming the worst about people. It means giving yourself permission to take your concerns seriously. A surprising number of people are willing to extend compassion, patience, understanding, and the benefit of the doubt to others while refusing to extend those same considerations to themselves. They notice something that bothers them, but immediately begin explaining it away. They tell themselves they are being too sensitive. They worry about overreacting. They search for reasons why their discomfort shouldn't count. Over time, this habit can become so automatic that people stop treating their own concerns as meaningful information. Instead of asking, "Why does this bother me?" they begin to ask, "How can I convince myself this isn't a problem?" Taking your concerns seriously doesn't mean assuming they're always correct. It doesn't mean every uncomfortable feeling is evidence of a serious issue. It simply means acknowledging that your reactions deserve curiosity rather than dismissal. If something repeatedly leaves you feeling confused, dismissed, anxious, disrespected, or emotionally unsafe, that experience deserves attention. You don't need overwhelming proof before allowing yourself to explore what you are feeling. Nor do you need permission from someone else to recognize that a situation is affecting you. In many unhealthy relationships, one of the first things people lose is trust in their own perceptions. They become so focused on understanding the other person's perspective that they stop listening to their own. They become highly skilled at explaining someone else's behavior while becoming increasingly disconnected from their own emotional experience. Taking your concerns seriously is often the first step in rebuilding that trust. It means allowing yourself to pause when something feels wrong instead of immediately explaining it away. Rather than dismissing the feeling, you remain curious about it and give yourself space to observe what may be contributing to it. Discomfort doesn't always provide immediate answers, but it can provide valuable information that warrants consideration. A useful exercise is to keep a simple journal of concerns throughout the relationship. The purpose is not to collect evidence against another person or focus on every minor frustration. Rather, it's a way of creating an accurate record of experiences, emotional responses, and recurring situations as they occur. This practice can make patterns easier to identify and reduce the tendency to minimize, forget, or rationalize concerns after the fact. Over time, a written record often provides a clearer picture of the relationship than memory alone. A journal can also help counter the tendency to second guess yourself. When people repeatedly explain away their discomfort, they may forget how often a particular issue has occurred or how strongly it affected them at the time. Having a written record can provide perspective and help distinguish between a one-time concern and a recurring pattern that deserves closer attention. The goal is not to become hypervigilant or suspicious. The goal is to develop enough confidence in your own judgment that you no longer feel obligated to argue against your instincts every time they signal that something may require attention. Many individuals recognize concerns long before they fully understand them. They notice inconsistencies, recurring disappointments, or behaviors that leave them feeling uneasy. The difficulty is often not a failure to observe what is happening, but the reluctance to treat those observations as meaningful. People frequently question their perceptions, minimize their reactions, or convince themselves that their concerns are not important enough to warrant attention. Many people struggle with red flags because uncertainty is inherently uncomfortable. When something feels inconsistent, confusing, or difficult to understand, there's a natural desire to find an immediate answer. People want to know whether they can trust the person in front of them, whether the relationship has long term potential, or whether the concerns they are experiencing are significant enough to warrant action. The desire for certainty is understandable, but it can sometimes create pressure to reach conclusions before enough information is available. As a result, individuals often move quickly in one direction or the other. Some dismiss their concerns because they fear being unfair, overly cautious, or judgmental. Others assume the worst and begin forming conclusions based on limited information. Neither approach creates meaningful clarity. Both can interfere with a person's ability to accurately evaluate what is unfolding within the relationship. Healthy discernment is rarely the product of instant clarity. It is typically developed through observation, experience, and thoughtful evaluation. More often, it develops through experience, reflection, and a willingness to tolerate temporary ambiguity while additional information becomes available. Relationships reveal themselves over time. While individual moments can provide useful insight, long term patterns are often far more revealing than isolated incidents. A single disappointment may not indicate a significant problem. A reoccurring pattern of disappointment deserves closer attention. A misunderstanding may simply be the result of poor communication. Repeated misunderstandings that remain unresolved may reveal deeper incompatibilities. For this reason, it is often more productive to evaluate patterns of behavior rather than focusing exclusively on individual events. Allowing a relationship to unfold naturally creates opportunities to observe how another person handles responsibility, conflict, accountability, and emotional intimacy. Over time, it becomes easier to see if actions consistently support promises, if difficult conversations lead to meaningful change, and if concerns are met with respect and consideration. These observations often provide a more accurate picture of the relationship than assumptions, explanations, or intentions alone. The manner in which a person responds when concerns are addressed can be particularly revealing. Healthy relationships are not built upon perfection. Every individual will make mistakes, experience misunderstandings, and occasionally fall short of expectations. What distinguishes healthy relationships is the willingness to acknowledge problems, accept responsibility when appropriate, and engage in sincere efforts to repair and improve a person's capacity for self reflection and accountability. A person's capacity for self reflection and accountability frequently provides more insight into the future of the relationship than the original concern itself. Conversely, patterns of defensiveness, avoidance, minimization, blame shifting, or repeated justification may indicate a reluctance to engage in the level of accountability healthy relationships require. While any single response should be considered within its broader context, recurring patterns often provide valuable information about how future challenges are likely to be handled. Many people later look back on a relationship and conclude that they failed to recognize what was happening. In reality, the issue is often not a lack of awareness, but a lack of confidence in their own perceptions. They noticed inconsistencies, experienced discomfort, and that something didn't feel quite right. However, those observations were repeatedly overshadowed by hope, empathy, and the desire for a different outcome. For many people, this is where the pain of hindsight begins. The realization is rarely that the warning signs were invisible. More often, it is the recognition that the signs were present all along, but their significance was minimized, explained away, or postponed in favor of the possibility that things would eventually become different. The good news is that self-trust can be rebuilt, discernment can be strengthened, awareness can grow. Every experience teaches us something about what we need, what we value, and what we are no longer willing to overlook. Real emotional awareness is not about becoming suspicious about everyone you meet. It is about learning to remain curious when something feels off instead of immediately explaining it away. Meaningful clarity often emerges through thoughtful questions, honest observation, and a willingness to pay attention to what consistently unfolds over time. Next time on Love Bombed, we're talking about how not to get love bombed and the practical ways people can protect themselves from mistaking attention for intention. Want to share your love bomb story anonymously? Send it to lovebombedpod@gmail.com or submit it through the link in the show notes. I'm Jen from Love Bombed, and I'll see you in the next episode.